But unfortunately, while telescopes have got...
Didn't save enough people.
We also hear these terrible stories about the illnesses that rescue workers are fighting right now. They've been documented, and we haven't even addressed the challenge that many of the family members face as they try to create an economic future in the wake of the loss of their loved ones. That is a brutal process that these families are very slowly navigating.
And even if you fight your way through the thicket, and most of them I suspect will financially wind up okay because there's been such an outpouring, it's the enormous upsetting in thousands of lives of the normal order of things. There's a line from Sean O'Casey, I think it is, children should bury their parents. Parents should not bury their children. And for thousands of people, Judy mentioned the fact that many of these people, particularly in the investment world, are go-getters, firefighters. How old are they? They're in their 30s. They're in their 40s. And it's not only that they've left wives, husbands, and children, they've left parents for whom this is, any of us who's a parent know, that is the worst thing you can face, and it is being faced not one at a time, but by a couple of thousand. And it makes what Aaron talked about, I think, all the more dreadful to contemplate, that this is a scar that will run a very long time. And we, Paula, you were quite right. I think this talk about closure comes very easy and kind of on the cheap, but it's just not the reality.
Not at all. And I think these families take great umbrage when they hear that word used, and they will tell you that. It stings, it hurts when they hear that, because they say that sort of disavows any knowledge of what they have to put up with on a day-to-day basis. I've spoken with aunts and uncles that are raising, their young nephews, and just the difficulty they've had in helping these kids try to understand what's happened in their family is just almost unbearable to think about.
See all these children down there, these babies and 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds, their American flag shirts meeting the President of the United States. We hope someday that they'll remember this moment beyond the grieving of this moment, that their encounter with the President of the United States or the Secretary of State of the United States will have a power to them that transcends this sad time.
John, I'm wondering if you could share with us anything you've learned about Secretary Powell and what he's been through in this past year. This is, after all, the city where he was born. If I know John, he's probably trying to get more excerpts from the President's speech that happens tonight at 9 o'clock.
Or he's got 4 sources on that. This is the members of Congress.
Through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Members of the Congress, Democrats and Republicans, and independent or, no, an independent or 2 sprinkled in. I had to think there for a second. I knew about Congressman Sanders.
There's one down south, actually, who may be switching. He was a Democrat who became an independent. I think he's about ready to make the last step and become Republican. But if you want to call it tripartisan, you could. That's fair.
Thank you. And after 11 3/4 hours that I got that close.
I was going to say, it is okay to be fuzzy. We've been sitting here for almost 12 hours.
I simply should have said, which is what I always do in a political moment, Judy, how many independents are there?
I only know about Bernie Sanders from Vermont, but there may be more. Somebody suggested this a minute ago. These people, they were arguing yesterday about the budget and about Homeland Security. Tomorrow they'll argue again, but today they're together, they're holding flags, they're singing God Bless America. But you can bet, your bottom dollar that they're going to go back to you know, back to their corners, if you will, because Congress is still in session for another 3 or 4 weeks. They have not, you'll be interested to know, the president, they have not agreed on and sent the president a single spending bill for any one of the 13 major federal agencies that get a spending bill. So there's a lot to be hashed out here. But
Well,
having said that, you know, they're smiling and hugging each other today.
They can go battle it out tomorrow. That's, I think, okay. That's the process. It's the way it's supposed to work.
Worked that way, you know, less than a year after Pearl Harbor. The Republicans, Democrats had a furious midterm election. In fact, Republicans picked up a lot of seats. Partisanship does not die when conflict begins, and a good thing, I think.
Wolf, you're out there. You've been at the Pentagon all day, and I imagine you're still there. As you've watched this all, what's been rolling through your mind?
Well, as I've been watching the screen for the last hours and hours and hours, and I can't help but, like Judy and so many of our viewers, look down at the bottom and see these names. CNN remembers the hundreds, in fact, the thousands of people who died on a year ago, exactly 1 year ago. And as I'm looking at these names, I keep seeing, as we're seeing right now, Cantor Fitzgerald, this huge investment company, or at least what once was a big securities firm located up on the top floors of the World Trade Center. And I had a cousin who was on the 102nd floor of the World Trade Center, and he worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. He, of course, died, Jeffrey Schreier. And, of course, my mind focuses in on him. I went to his wedding years ago. A lovely young man, a good son, a good husband, and someone who's I'm thinking of right now as I keep seeing these hundreds of names associated with Cantor Fitzgerald. I keep looking for his name. I haven't seen it yet. It may have gone by when I wasn't looking, but it's just a personally painful moment for me to remember that he was on the 102nd floor. And I remember also in 1993 at the first World Trade Center attack, he was up on the 102nd floor. He did climb down 102 floors, and he was safe, but the next day went back to work. There again, Cantor Fitzgerald, once again, if you look at the bottom of the screen. Just a sad moment for me personally as I sit here at the Pentagon and hear a lot of heartfelt, sad stories from people here who endured as well.
One of the things I think I learned about New York, and perhaps New Yorkers learned too in this, and none of us is very far removed from this. We all know somebody who knows somebody who at least knows. So I have not met one person who's more than 3 steps removed, and probably no more than 2. Maybe it's not your cousin or your spouse, but it's your barber's wife or
Classmate's daughter.
A classmate's daughter. It is the 3,000 people is an enormous number because it touches tens of thousands, I suspect more than that, of lives. And so you find yourself, you know, your dentist's brother-in-law was in that building or something like that, and you are changed for it.
Because it's an unnatural death. We just saw on the screen, the AP tells us that former Baltimore Colt quarterback Johnny Unitas died. New Yorkers have not so fond, in a much more trivial memory of him. He quarterbacked the Colts against the New York Giants in 1959, I think, early, in one of the greatest games ever, and died in the fullness of his years after a long and successful life. And that's the way one hopes, we all hope, that the process works. And
the numbers are so clinical, though. You know, when you hear that almost 3,000 people died, I guess for me, it wasn't until this morning when I heard Mayor Giuliani, among others, slowly read the name of every single person killed here a year ago that it really got to me. It's hard to get a grasp on exactly what that means. I think you raise a good point, Aaron, because I've yet to meet someone who has not been affected by this.
Our friend, and many of you know him, Rabbi Mark Gelman, in the Yankee Stadium Memorial to the second Sunday after the attack, said, don't think about this as 3,000 people who died. Think of it as one person who died 3,000 times. That these are all individuals, and we do in fact get caught up in the big number, the raw number of it all. But as each of these names goes by, as each of these families greets the president or the president greets each of them, each one of them was somebody who mattered.
That's why the series that the New York Times is still running. It's a year later. Those portraits of grief was probably, for me, the most affecting and powerful remembrance, because in 2 or 3 paragraphs they captured them not as icons or as abstractions, but as human beings. They loved to coach Little League. He was a fanatic for opera. She loved to cook strange food. They loved to take trips. Here's what they did with their kids every day. And that was one person's story, and then another person's story. And pick up the New York Times today, and there's 2 full pages of it, which really reminds you of what this is about. You're quite right, Paul. It's not 3,000 names that go by. It's lives, and lives that touched a dozen, 100, 1,000 other people.
John King, our senior White House correspondent, watching the president's speech tonight as well. John?
Aaron, we have seen the president over the past year, sometimes within minutes of each other, juggling the competing roles, if you will, the very different roles he has to play here, consoling the family members of the victims of those killed. And as you noted earlier, the president seems to know what each member wants. Sometimes he's joking and smiling, sometimes he's signing an autograph, other times there are tears in the president. He will be at this site for some time longer as he makes his way through here, and then some brief preparations for his speech to the nation tonight. And we will see the president begin to turn the corner, if you will, there. Today is a day of reflection and healing. The president will signal his resolve tonight, though, to carry through the war on terrorism until its finish as he sees it. And then tomorrow, the much more controversial debate, whether even as phase 1 of the war on terrorism continues against al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and elsewhere, the president will tell the United Nations its very credibility is at stake if it does not stand up to Saddam Hussein and Iraq. So many challenges for the president, and as Judy noted earlier, we focus today on remembering the pain of the country and the international challenge, the fight, if you will, that was thrust upon the president. His close advisor, Karen Hughes, I mentioned her earlier, she put it this way in the days after that: the president did not pick this fight, but he knows full well he will be defined by it. And she described a meeting on September 12th, the morning after last year, in which the president told everyone in the room, this is now the mission of our presidency. First and foremost, among anything else, this is what we will be defined by. This is the fight we must win.
Thank you, John. John King, our senior White House correspondent. Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy.
Aaron, I was just listening to John and thinking, of course, the White House will say there's nothing political about the timing of tomorrow's speech, and yet surely coming one day after the outpouring today, the remembering of 9/11, you have to believe that some thought was given to the lift, the benefit of the doubt, whatever you want to call it, that the president is going to have as he makes what I think John has accurately described is a very difficult argument before a very skeptical audience, not only at the United Nations, but in Washington before the Congress and other influential opinion leaders in this country.
Jeff, I saw you grin when Judy talked a little bit about the timing of his speech before the General Assembly tomorrow.
Not because of any cynical notions, but Judy's right. To think that there is no political fallout from something like this is like the formula for turning lead into gold. Take a pound of lead and don't think of the word elephant. I mean, the midterm elections are less than 2 months away. Democrats are watching what's going on today and thinking about it. The White House is thinking about it. It's part of the process. And in the case of tomorrow, to play both to the national and international community, not now about terrorism. A year ago, it was easier for the president in the sense that nobody was going to stand up except for, let me be editorial, lunatics, and say, oh, wasn't this a good thing? Let's debate whether it was a good thing to slaughter 3,000 innocents. Taking the United States into a military action against Iraq is a very, very different story. And it is going to have not just international consequences. There are political ramifications to this, and anybody who says, oh no, nobody should be thinking about that is delusional.
It's not clear exactly what the president will outline tomorrow. There are those who feel that there will be a subtle, it's okay to go at a lone message, and there are others who think that won't be the case tomorrow. You, of course, will be joining Aaron and me as we cover the speech tomorrow morning.
Last year, when the president talked to the UN after 9/11, he said, this is all of your fight. Because even now, terrorists are all over the world planning things maybe against your country. It's harder to make that argument in that one-to-one way tomorrow, but I think John's already told us, and if there's anybody who knows what's up with John King, that he's going to challenge the UN, saying this is your credibility, not just the United States, to do something about someone who's developing weapons of mass destruction. I think it's a much tougher argument to make than he had a year ago.
The President speaks tomorrow about 10:30, 10:20 as I recall, over on the east side of New York, the General Assembly of the United Nations. He has plenty to do before then, including a speech tonight from Ellis Island just after, and I do mean just after 9 o'clock in the way that these things work. Bill Hemmer has been around Ground Zero with us since early this morning as well. Bill?
Yeah. Aaron, it strikes me for the past, I'd say, a year and a half, John, we've been watching this president show up at events, and he is one punctual man. Oftentimes he gets to a location early, and to be quite honest with you, stuns a lot of us in the media that it happens that way. But right now, Aaron, we are watching a man who is in absolutely no hurry. To our viewers, he is down 7 stories below the street level in the area known as the Pit. Behind him, essentially, there is a circle, a ring, where there have been thousands of flowers placed there earlier in the day here today. And to give you a sense of the way he is working this, if you were to start at 12 o'clock and work counterclockwise, the president has moved from his right to his left, and right now we think is right about 1 o'clock. So the circle is almost complete here, but as I stated, this is a man who is in absolutely no hurry today, almost at times relishing the fact that he can share his own emotion with the people who have grieved now for 1 year, from 1 year solid.
Bill, thank you. Bill Hemmer, who has been at Ground Zero, a vantage point 10 stories up, looking down on the Pit, which seems in any circumstance an altogether inelegant way to refer to that area, but it is what the Pit and the Pile is what the workers used to call it. It is neither now. It is a construction site where someday, and in fact it'll probably be 8 to 10 years before anything really is done there, before it's all done there. Ground Zero, whatever you want to call it, will be rebuilt again in some combination of commerce and memorial, in some vision yet to be agreed upon or perhaps even seen in anyone's mind's eye.
A combination is surely to alienate some of the family members. They've made it quite clear how strongly they feel about what the site should be. Some view it as a cemetery. We just saw Mayor Rudy Giuliani. He says this should be a memorial site, and there are family members I've spoken with who really believe it's very important for some sort of commerce to be recognized down there, not necessarily on the footprints of the old buildings, but somewhere on that 16-acre site.
It is totally in keeping with the spirit of New York that there would be a contentious, frank and open exchange of views that last for years about just what to do about this. This happens even in the absence of something as grave as this. This is New York.
But and this is, not to sound terribly obvious yet again today, but this is a complicated question that involves literally billions of dollars and thousands of hearts. But I've spent a lot of time actually on this part of the story, I have been surprised at the dignity with which this battle has been fought so far. There are strong feelings on all sides of this, and yet there does seem to be, and I give particular credit to the people at the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation who have to referee all of this and navigate this and ultimately decide this, that they have been very patient listeners to all of the varied constituencies here. And so what could be a really uncomfortable, I think, for everyone in the country, not just New Yorkers, uncomfortable fight, has been so far, we emphasize so far, kind of nicely waged, if that makes sense.
I have been trying to process what we've all experienced. Those of you who've been with us most of the day, Aaron and I have been here over 12 hours now. You know, what I think we've maybe sum total missed 2 minutes of this thing together. We've left the set very little today, and it has been so terribly, terribly sad as we were introduced to some of the family members in Shanksville and now those who have come to Ground Zero to greet the president. At the same time, I have found it oddly uplifting, I guess, that we have shared this experience today. We've had the luxury of some reflection we don't normally have in our daily lives, and I have just found this to be incredibly powerful. I thought that ceremony this morning as Ground Zero really did honor the dignity of many families who struggled to get here today.
There was a young girl this morning, but it seems back when we were still wiping the sleep out of our eyes, who lost her stepfather. And she stood up with all of the poise that you could possibly imagine for getting a child in anyone under the circumstance, and talked about missing her father and what he meant to her, and that she had not gotten to say, "I love you" one last time. And I thought then, and I think now, how close to the surface our feelings still are in all of this. A year is a long time in some respects, and in other ways it's not. And when we saw this kid, and she looked to me to be 11 or 12, and I know that age pretty well in a young girl. I've got one. And I admired her strength and poise and her ability to pour her soul out with such eloquence and dignity and strength. And wherever her daddy is, I guarantee you he's looking down proud of his kid this morning. I sure was.
And you know what? That really captures, I think, one of the reasons why this is so extraordinary. That it is at the same time as personal and emotional a day as you could imagine. Death under the most benign circumstances does that to us. And one of the most public, policy-laden days. What do we do about this? How do we solve it? What do we do about Homeland Security? What do we do about terrorism abroad? Is Iraq the next target? And you put those two things together, the simple human loss that's being felt by thousands and thousands of people, and then all of these other implications. And it's I think why this day is, I don't think anybody can get their arms around this day. I mean, I think a lot of us have felt the feeling that we're in a business that sometimes says too much and tries to inflate not very significant events. This is a whole different story.
You know, I expected to wrap these things up. It just strikes me that this is one of those days where, in that respect, people are perfectly capable of wrapping it up each in their own way. This sort of day means something slightly different to all of us and to the millions of you who have joined us throughout this long and important and at times difficult morning. As Paula said, those 3 hours this morning were for me. I mean, you know me, I cry at movie trailers, but it was just hard, and it was hard for the country, and hard for all of us. But as the day moved on, I think we came to understand the importance of the day, why this day mattered, and you all are perfectly capable of summing up your own feelings without our help. I am certain.
We're now going to turn the program over to Wolf, who is standing.
Not quite. Let's just stay with the president. A couple, while we watch, if I may, a couple little pieces of business. Lou Dobbs will have an abbreviated money line shortly. We need to move some things around, so that's a bit yet away. And we want to stay with the president for a bit. I think that sign said West Point remembers. It went by very quickly. The president has been down here for a while now. He got here at about 5 or so.
He has an amazing capacity to give. I think it was John that was talking about how exhausting this must be for him emotionally to have repeated this scene over and over and over again today.
You'll remember back when President Clinton went to Oklahoma City after the bombing of the Albert Murrah building and spent a great deal of time with those families. And the death toll, I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the neighborhood of about 170 people were killed. All right, this is 15 times the scale of what was then the most costly terrorist attack on American soil. And when you realize the sheer scope of what's involved in comforting not one person who's lost, not a single Secret Service man, not a single military person, but that number, you begin to understand why the president may well be there for quite a bit of time.
Oddly, I think we're getting too good at this sort of thing. There have been too many occasions in too many recent years where presidents have been called upon to do this part, and we've gotten, or they have, too good at it. Jeff?
Back during the Cold War, there was a story written about a man at a time when nuclear war might be threatened, and the last line of the story was, "Dear God, let us die one at a time." That's what we're feeling a lot of today. They didn't get that chance.
Works for me. Thank you. Yes.
We know it's been difficult for those of you who have dipped in and out of the ceremonies. We've taken you today, and here in New York at Ground Zero, at the Pentagon, Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I know how conflicted many of you were out there about how it was you were supposed to spend your day, and I feel actually a little bit more whole today after watching this and taking some comfort from seeing the strength and the resilience we also saw exhibited today in that sea of sadness.
Well, we have seen a lot of strength and resilience from our countrymen and women over the last year. We'll see you again at 7 o'clock tonight to wrap up the day. Connie Chung joins us. The President will speak to the country at 9 o'clock Eastern Time from Ellis Island, and Larry King live, a special 2-hour edition of Larry King tonight with lots of folks, including the First Lady and Senator Clinton here, and many others. I'm sure they'll be talking about the president's speech and the events of this extraordinary day. So until 7 o'clock, thank you all for the time you spent with us, and we'll see you again at 7. I'll see you again tomorrow morning for the president's speech to the General Assembly.
This whole team will be...
Opportunity to think about the future of this site. Some half a dozen landowners actually own this site, and there's a huge debate over what will actually take place here for a permanent memorial site. But one of the most touching stories I heard, really, when you talk about so many families who have started foundations, special causes.
States, may I speak on behalf of the rest of the world that our hearts still go out in compassion and sympathy as you still wrestle with the consequences of those traumatic events of the awful day we are today commemorating.
Now we join with our fellow Americans in a minute of silence.
Gordon M. Ahmad Jr. Edelmiro Abad.
Daniel Hal Chrisman.
Mark Lawrence Davis.
Jasper Baxter.
Gene Collins.
John Michael Collins.
And I hope you didn't hurt too much.
We will always remember how it began and who fell first. The thousands who went to work, boarded a plane, or reported to their post. We honor each name and each life.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Wherever a military is sent in the world, you bring hope and justice and promise of a better day.
We will win this war on terror. We will win no matter how long or hard or difficult or costly it is.
There were no survivors in this field on September 11th. Ordered by the terrorists to be quiet and remain calm and their lives would be spared, they said no. Have no doubt that hundreds, if not thousands of Americans, perhaps some who join us this day, survived that crash. And America is grateful.
I'm 11 years old and lost my sister, Diora, on Flight 93. I miss her very much. She taught me a lot of things, but most of all, she taught me to be people and animals.
If we've learned nothing else from this tragedy, we've learned that our lives are short and there's simply no time for hate. Flight 93 was an extraordinary gathering of individuals. We shall grieve that they died, but we shall rejoice that they lived. For all of our loved ones who perished here in Shanksville, we can depart with the gift of hope. Hope for our children, hope for our future, and hope for our everlasting freedom.
The murder of innocents cannot be explained, only endured. And though they died in tragedy, they did not die in vain.
One year ago, and today we were reminded of a war that is far from ended. Tonight, law enforcement officials and U.S. Armed Forces are on a heightened state of alert. We begin tonight with John King at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan.
Lou, the president traveled today to victims' memorials, first at the Pentagon, then to Pennsylvania, now here in New York City. Tonight, an address to the American people, and tomorrow, a speech to the United Nations in which the president makes his case that the world should prepare for a possible military confrontation with Iraq.
Authorities take a freighter bound for New Jersey back out to sea after traces of radioactivity are detected. Al-Qaeda cells are believed to be operating in an extraordinary ABC.
Pero también la vida se hizo presente aquel día. 18 personas fueron rescatadas con vida 48 horas después del derrumbe. 103 esposas de fallecidos han dado a luz a hijos después. Hace pocos días, una cadena de televisión, Al Jazeera, reveló los nombres de los organizadores directos del atentado que lidera Osama Bin Laden. 4.000 agentes del FBI están investigando los ataques. Ningún dato, ninguna cifra, nada, absolutamente nada, es comparable con el dolor humano de todo un pueblo que marcará un estigma para siempre, aunque para que los que quedan permanecerá siempre alta la mirada, pura la fe.
Y en directo volvemos ya a Nueva York. Allí podemos ver al alcalde, exalcalde Giuliani y al presidente George Bush en este homenaje que se está realizando en Nueva York, donde hace instantes nomás llegó el presidente norteamericano. Vamos ahora a Jorge Pizarro. Adelante, Jorge.
Fernando Sete, ¿cuál es el pensamiento de ustedes?
El nuestro es que no solamente es un año de recordación de los fallecidos en Estados Unidos, los bomberos, sino un símbolo, ¿no? Un llamado de atención que indirectamente y con respecto a otro tipo de cosas también se está dando en nuestro país. En los últimos días el tema de la no violencia, el tema...
As its targets.
There's fog and shadows where those folks are operating, and there's an awful lot we don't see.
41 Americans in Afghanistan have died since the United States first launched strikes in Afghanistan in early October. Another 10 in the Philippines. 3,000 to 4,000 Taliban have been killed and 11 al-Qaeda training camps destroyed.
That was a major step because al-Qaeda required a sanctuary to operate, to communicate as sort of a focus point for all of its thinking and planning. And that was a big loss for them when we drove them out and put them on the run.
Al-Qaeda military commander Mohammed Atef was killed in a November airstrike, and bin Laden operations chief Abu Zubaydah was captured in Pakistan. But bin Laden and his key lieutenants apparently remain at large.
It's not that hard to move a lot of people around and be undiscovered in the short term. To keep doing it for months at a time is a lot harder. Eventually, people need supplies, they need to rest, they need to recuperate.
An unknown number of al-Qaeda leaders are thought to be alive, most in Afghanistan and Pakistan, Iran, and Iraq. Indonesia is believed to be another growing refuge. U.S. officials and others indicate members of the al-Qaeda sleeper network are assumed to be on U.S. soil.
The United States is the second wild card after Indonesia because clearly there are major pockets of cells in the United States that have not been found or identified but are believed to still exist here, including those who had assisted 9/11 hijackers and others who were planted here in years before.
Zacharias Musawi is the only person to date to be officially charged with terrorism. The U.S. military is holding 80 prisoners in Afghanistan, another 600 at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. U.S. officials have interrogated more than 2,000 people in Afghanistan. The Treasury Department says $112 million in terrorist assets have been seized worldwide, $42 million in the United States.
The war on terrorism will not end soon. The terrorists who attacked us on September 11th, for them it was the opening salvo. They do intend to strike again, we know that.
Now, it's apparent that the terrorists from the very first strike have had the strategic advantage of surprise, but what experts point out is that with each terrorist who's apprehended, we learn vital information about how they operate.
September 11th, 1941, construction began on the Pentagon. Nearly 3 months later, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, spurring builders to finish the massive project in a remarkable 16 months. 60 years to the day after construction began, the Pentagon became a terrorist target, an attack that immediately drew comparisons to Pearl Harbor. A year later, few of those parallels hold.
For many people in the United States, our everyday lives, when we're not flying somewhere, are pretty much as they were on September 10th, 2001. That was not true on December 7th, 1942, a year after Pearl Harbor. No one in the United States could say that his or her everyday life was the same as it had been before Pearl Harbor.
The government ordered rationing of gasoline and tires, sugar and butter, even halting production of jukeboxes to conserve raw materials for the war effort. Congress introduced a military draft. All adult men were ordered to work or fight, and entire industries were enlisted in the war effort. 120,000 Japanese Americans and a smaller number with German ancestry were arrested. Harbor, Congress passed a $25 billion tax increase on businesses and individuals. Government spending sowed the beginnings of an economic boom.
Pearl Harbor came to be got long surplus of labor and pent-up unsatisfied demand that wasn't being satisfied because there wasn't enough money for it. But in 1941-42, we were war effort, huge orders for ourselves and our allies for hard goods.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average recovered nearly all of its losses and was down just 1% for the year. Today, the Dow is down 10% since last September 11th. In 1942, the Justice Department suspended prosecution of General Electric on antitrust charges to avoid interfering with the war effort. Today, accused white-collar criminals are paraded before Congress and cameras. After September 11th, professional sporting events were postponed temporarily. After Pearl Harbor, FDR urged baseball to play ball as a diversion to the war effort. It did so without many stars such as Ted Williams, who enlisted. Today, the lone example is a football player who gave up a $3.6 million contract to join the Army Rangers. That illustrates the biggest difference between the years following Pearl Harbor and 9/11. Today, relative few have been forced to sacrifice or have chosen to do so.
Casey, thank you very much. Gurja says Al-Qaeda has been weakened considerably over the past year, but still has the ability to launch a
to remind the American people of their moral calling as a beacon of liberty around the world. At this speech, the President is expected to talk of a year of sorrow for the families and the sacrifice for the military. He will also remind the people of the United States that the war on terrorism will be long and that they must not waver. Stan and Jill.
John, it's been a day of remembering, but also a day of reaching across races, reaching across cultures. Has there been this sense of togetherness in all you've seen?
In many ecumenical services around the country involving all religions, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, all these religions coming together, races coming together, a day when the people of the United States and indeed the people of the world ago today. It was in fact a very difficult day, as many people get the emotions they felt 12 months ago today, but of course many people wanted to honor the thousands of people who were killed on September 11th.
Lower Manhattan, where a ceremony is about to begin.
As Jill said, you can see some of the people there who've gathered at Battery Park for this sunset and candlelight vigil to mark what has been an extraordinary day, Jill, in the United States. We've seen people right across the country commemorating this day, both with reverence, I suppose, and also a sense of hope and perhaps renewal.
Stan, and I think it marks that clear then an eternal flame that will be lit this evening in the ceremony to be observed by U.S. President George W. Bush, other And you've been listening there to the New York Philharmonic Brass, conducted by Laurent Messel. Now, they've been playing a fanfare for the common man, kicking off tonight's ceremony in Battery Park.
Man and mind is nothing but a dream. They are right. It is the American dream. In 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt defined for the world the 4 freedoms on which that dream is based. He said, "In the future days which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, anywhere in the world. This nation has placed its destiny in the hands and heads and hearts of its millions of free men and women, and its faith in freedom under the guidance of God. Freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. Our strength is in our unity of purpose. To that high concept, there can be no end save victory." For our country, September 11 will always be a date of sorrow, the heartbreaking anniversary of great loss that we share with 91 nations. But the memories of those we lost will burn with unending brightness and ignite a flame of freedom that lights the world.
Jill, as we saw there, Michael Bloomberg, the Mayor of New York, lighting the eternal flame, saying that September 11th will always be a date of sorrow, and now world leaders are coming up to light their candles from the eternal flame.
Our strength is in our unity of purpose. That was spoken by Michael Bloomberg earlier, and we're seeing just that now. 90 world leaders all gathering together in what's probably a very public show of togetherness there, Stan.
We can see Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, and also Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, who are standing with Mayor Bloomberg and greeting the various members, various leaders of member states throughout the world. We heard a little bit earlier from Mayor Bloomberg as he stressed the 4 freedoms originally spoken by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his famous speech. Of course, the freedom of speech, the freedom to worship God however you wish, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, he said, anywhere in the world. We're about to leave off now from the candlelit observance at Battery Park. We've seen, of course, the eternal flame-lit leaders from 90 different countries coming to light their candles to be part of that vigil. So we'll go to our break now over pictures of the candlelight observance at Battery Park near Ground Zero.
And you're seeing the Statue of Liberty on Ellis Island. We're going to take a very short break, but stay with us. Coming up, we'll have more live reports of the day.
File past the eternal flame and receive a candle from Mayor Michael Bloomberg, this expression of their sense of what Kofi Annan calls common humanity for which the United Nations must stand.
Because of course all across New York, people right at this moment are lighting candles in parks across New York and squares like Union Square, places indeed where many people gathered in the immediate aftermath of last year's attacks, gathered together in shock, looking for comfort, and indeed places where many families went looking for loved ones. So quite a significant moment and a very effective way, really, of America bringing the world in on its grief, this ceremony, isn't it? To see all these world leaders and politicians holding candles. Kofi Annan there, the Secretary General of the United Nations, standing next to Blair Bloomberg, handing out the candles. It's now dark in New York.
That's right, and I think the other significance of this particular ceremony is that it's being held at sunset. It marks, if you like, the beginning of the end of this painful day. It's meant, and Mayor Bloomberg has made this clear, it's meant in a sense to move New York forward from a period of intense and appalling grief and mourning that's lasted every one of the 365 days since September the 11th, 2001. But the attempt here is to say to New Yorkers, not let's forget, of course not, but let us now dedicate ourselves to the future as we continue to remember the past. That's something that Mayor Bloomberg has talked a lot about in the last few days to his fellow New Yorkers. And this ceremony at the going down of the sun, if you like, on this particularly poignant day is meant to help New Yorkers point the way to the future. And that's why in the 5 boroughs of this great city, candles are being distributed. People will be hearing music designed to be uplifting as much as to be mournful. And the idea is that New Yorkers will feel some sense of release from the appalling fear